All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the final of 3 webinars this fall from the Gathering Place, where faith formation leaders gather, learn, share, and grow. Scott is the leadership pastor on the pastoral team at Trinity Mennonite Church in Glendale, Arizona. As the leadership pastor, Scott acts as vision coordinator, ministry organizer, spiritual leader, and cultivator of a discipleship culture at Trinity Mennonite. Last spring, Scott taught a Sunday school series at Trinity on the topic of Anabaptism in American politics, and his fellow pastor Megan Good told me all about that, and she was so impressed with it. And that's how I came to invite him to do this series of webinars. This topic is highly relevant to our faith formation because it speaks to how we fundamentally view ourselves as people of faith within our culture and how we choose to allow culture to shape us versus how our commitment to Christ shapes us. And Scott's teaching is helping us to think some new thoughts that hopefully are aligned with our identity as disciples of Jesus, helping us to be shaped more like Jesus as we think about our relation to American politics. So I want to go ahead and turn it over to Scott for this final evening of teaching on the topic of vision.
Thank you all for joining me for this third week here. I'm really excited to be talking with you about this topic. I've been excited about it the entire time, but this final week, as I've been going over it, I've just been really, really interested in getting through the really difficult parts of the conversation. This third week is really how do we move this past theory and ideas into the practical world. I will be trying to answer your questions. I've already received some in a couple of emails from people that they want me to go over, and I will hopefully answer them, several of them, in the content. And if not, please make sure to put them in the chat bar on Zoom so that I can make sure to answer them there. I am going to assume that you've either listened to the previous webinars or you have been to either a seminar of mine or the Sunday school class, and you're one of Trinity's people, so that we can move forward with the content for this third week, because there's already a lot that is necessary to gather before we move on. Well, I'm going to do a quick recap, though, so that everyone can be on the same page. So at least if this is your first one, you'll have a sense of what we're talking about when we go through this. For the past couple of webinars, we've been going through, of course, the title here, Putting Jesus on the Ballot, but we've been talking specifically about how we should be viewing government as Christians who follow in the Anabaptist tradition, how we should understand government's role in society, and how our role is not exactly the same, and how we should be interacting because of that. Today, I believe we called it vision. This is policy and possibilities when Jesus is Lord. So today we're going to, as we recap, we're focusing toward that. After we've known what the government is and what it does and what we're here for, what are the policies and possibilities as we follow through? So first off, a few of the things. First, we recognize that the means of Christ are incompatible with the means of government. The means of Christ are incompatible with the means of government. The means of Christ being the commitment to nonviolence, the centrality of God's kingdom, and emphasizing that as the focus of what we do. So the centrality of God's kingdom, as well as the centrality of Jesus then as the king of God's kingdom. So this nonviolence, non-coercion, Jesus-centeredness, this is the means by which the kingdom of God operates, and this is not compatible with the means of government. The main reason being that all governments hold their authority exclusively through violence. Now, this is always the most controversial part of the conversation. I will reiterate the main idea of this, which is not to say that is a constant violent action taken by the government, but it is the threat of violence against people which gives government authority. So it is the unification of a people together. And in some governments, it is an authority granted by the people, meaning they get together and they say who should be in charge, sort of thing. But in the end, that authority is held by the ability and the accepted ability, we would say, the granted ability by the people to use violence to enforce that order. That is inherently the difference that puts the division between the kingdom of God and the means then of Christ. So government can never behave in a Christian way. There is no Christian government. There is no government that can follow Christ. That isn't to say that government doesn't have a role. Now, the main role of government then is to limit evil. All sorts of evil can exist in the world, and the role of government is to limit it in the greatest possible way. This becomes difficult knowing that all governments hold their authority exclusively through violence. How can a government limit evil if it's using evil? Well, I've introduced you all to the evil continuums. The simple idea here is that there is an evil in the world that exists, which the government is trying to limit. And when government does its job, it uses as little evil as possible. And that evil presses down the natural evil. And the end result is less evil. Now, that's the goal, of course, that if a government is using evil means, which is violence, to enforce laws, to enforce, whether those laws are good or bad, to enforce laws and to move things forward for a society, then this is hopefully the outcome. But, of course, we know that some governments do not. Some governments use a lot of evil. And while they do reduce evil, the end result is more evil, a greater end of evil. Also, there are governments who use so much evil that they nearly eradicate all of the natural evil. But they use so much so that the end result is, of course, evil as well. I've argued in some ways that this is what Rome was like in terms of how people expected society to look like. They expected the world to be full of horrible evils, and Rome could keep their finger on all of that by holding power, an imperial power over its citizens. And so you end up with something like this, at least as they may have expected, or as they may have described it. The difficulty is that these continuums are not objective. They are purely subjective. You and I may disagree on multiple things about this. For one, we may disagree on how evil something is in society. Just how bad is that thing, whatever it may be. More importantly, we may argue on how evil the government action is. How bad is the action they're taking to confront or limit that evil? And when we disagree on that, we will automatically disagree on the outcome, whether they're successful or not. What's even harder is that we may flat out disagree on whether or not they were successful in the end. So we could, even if we agree on these two, we may disagree on whether or not in the end they were even successful at limiting evil at all. This should give us a lot of pause when we talk about the power of government. Government is incredibly powerful. It is the most powerful force that humans have on one another. And in that way, this is an incredibly dangerous situation that also needs to be constantly watched and evaluated as Christians. So we're going to talk about today what that would look like. We're going to actually say, what does it look like if we step into the mix? Not just standing on the outside talking about it, but step into the middle of it and get our hands a little dirty. So first part is policy. Policy. Our political positions have large and lasting impact on our world and the world around us. The little bubbles we exist in and the big bubbles of the entire globe. Our governments, at now more than ever in history, have immense power that seems to continually grow with technology and communications, have immense power. And we need to be paying attention to that because that immense power can cause direct harm through war and police action, financial disruption in massive ways. We cannot simply pretend that governments around the world are not capable of devastating everything that we see. Now, this is not too hard to understand. Most people have a general sense that because of things like nuclear weapons, hopefully we now understand that that computer viruses or that are weaponized, these sort of things can now be massively powerful to damage whole systems, whole countries, obliterate millions of people. But governments also have power that can be used in ways that produce good for society. When we see that, we know that they have the power to take their violent actions and drastically reduce injustice and oppression and suffering. They can end slavery. They can fund great medical advances. They can make parking lots safer for the visually impaired. They can do massive things that we would never be able to do as individuals. And recognizing that means we have the ability to say, with good and bad that is out there, and the massive amounts of good and bad that can be done, we need to recognize that that is a responsibility for us, because we have the capacity, at least in our government, to be able to engage that. And so that is a responsibility that is given to us in this situation. However, even with all this power to do good, governments are not the kingdom of God. Governments are not and never will be the kingdom of God. One of the things I asked at the very beginning of the first webinar, and still matters a lot for this conversation, is for you to decide whether or not you think your political preferences are right. Do you believe that your political preferences are the right political preferences? Do you believe that your political view of things, how you would like things to go in the legislature, in the executive branches of our government, in the police, the way the police interact with the world, in the way that we create treaties with other countries, in any of that, do you believe that your views on it are right? And we noted that, of course, if you happen to have a view on it, then you view it to be right. That's why you hold it. No one holds a view that they think is wrong. And it might be, maybe someone out here has the best version of government we've ever heard of. Maybe someone. I'm not sure. I didn't talk to Derek ahead of time, but maybe Derek or Jody or Bill have the best government I've ever seen, and can, fill out, write their own constitution for the best government anyone's ever seen in the history of the entire world. Maybe people would look upon the government that one of us would write and would say, that is the best it's ever going to be. Even then, it will not be the kingdom of God. Even then, it won't come close to the beauty and true power in the kingdom of God. Let's look at a little story that highlights this. I like to take people way back in the Bible to talk about this, because the New Testament doesn't give us a good image of how to engage government. They were involved in different conversations at the time, at least narratively. So instead, we're going to look back to the story of Daniel. Now, you may know the story of Daniel. We're going to look at one piece of it because it's a fairly large book, but we're going to look at one piece briefly here. In Daniel chapter 2. Now, in this story, to give you a little bit of a recap, Daniel has been captured by Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel's captured by Babylon and is serving, in prison with King Nebuchadnezzar. While there, the king of Babylon has a dream. And the dream is impressive. It's an impressive and really complicated dream, it seems. So complicated that he's devastated that he has this dream. He thinks that it is clearly something that the gods have given him, and someone wants to tell him something, and he needs to know what the answer is. So he brings in his wisest people. Now, this is one of those things that lets you know the character of a person. because he brings in his wisest people and he doesn't like what they have to say, so he kills them. That should let you know what this guy is like, okay? Now, he is the leader of the most powerful country in the entire area. As far as they know, the world. This is the most powerful government that the world knows. So this leader, this wise person who's angry now at all the wise people who he killed, hears about Daniel and hears that Daniel can understand these dreams. So essentially, Daniel hears the story. He hears the dreams this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, and prays about it and produces an answer. And no one else has, but he produces an answer. Let's take a look at what he says. He says, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, you were looking, and there, rising before you, was a single massive statue. This statue was huge, shining with dazzling light, and was awesome to see. The statue's head was made of pure gold. Its chest and its arms were made from silver. Its abdomen and its hips were made from bronze. Its legs were of iron, and its feet were a mixture of iron and clay. You observed this until a stone was cut, but not by hands. And it smashed the statue's feet of iron and clay and shattered them. Then all the parts shattered simultaneously: iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. They became like chaff left on summer threshing floors. The wind lifted them away until no trace of them remained. But the stone that smashed the statue became a mighty mountain, and it filled the entire earth. Now, Daniel gives him an interpretation of this. See, this imagery here, which we're going to get to more here in a second, this imagery of gold and silver and bronze and iron mixed with clay. The imagery that he tells him next is, he says, see, here you should know that these are all images of kingdoms. And the gold one at the top, that's yours, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. The others are lesser governments, but your government, your kingdom, is the gold one at the top. It's the best. Everyone looks at it and is in awe of what people have created. They look upon the governments that have been created here, and they are all in awe. This is awesome, is what the text says. This is awesome. Look what we've created. Look what you have created, Nebuchadnezzar. This, remember then, this is the top. Let's look at the next section here, 44 to 45. But in those days, after he's explained what the different pieces are, that the gold is the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, he says this: but in the days of those kings, of all those governments, the God of heaven will raise up an everlasting kingdom that will be indestructible. Its rule will never pass to another people. It will shatter other kingdoms. It will put an end to all of them. It will stand firm forever, just like you saw when the stone which was cut from the mountain, but not by hands, shattered the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. A great God has revealed to the king what will happen in the future. The dream is certain. Its meaning can be trusted. This image that he gives him, gold, silver, bronze, iron mixed with clay, all are crushed but not by anything humans could create, but by a stone carved by God. Both here in this story right now and later in the story of Daniel, which you should just read the whole thing. It's a great book. And later in the story, though, in all of this time, we recognize that what Daniel is doing and what Daniel will do is serve this gold government. Serve in this golden government, which is a government which denies the divinity of his own God, which is not at all aligned with his faith, but he serves nonetheless. He serves consistently, speaking the truth of what God has told him within that context. He never, however, equates that kingdom that he serves, this gold kingdom, with the kingdom of God. And it is easy for us. It is easy for us to look at what we can create with the power in these governments and look upon the statues that we can create, the golden government maybe that we have in our own minds, and take our eyes off of the rock that is coming, the stone that God is carving. The image in this, it's really important the way this whole thing comes together. In fact, I would say this is one of the best images of the entire scripture about the power of government as well as the weakness of government. See, all of those pieces, whether it was iron, clay, or bronze, or silver, or gold, they have to be pulled out of the rock. They have to be pulled out and processed and made and formed by people to try and create what they can create. But none of that work creates stone. No matter how hard they work, no matter how golden they get their government, it can never be turned into stone. Now, governments can be better than others. Gold governments, silver governments, bronze governments. Some can be better than others, but none of them are the kingdom of God. So if we're going to talk about policy and engaging these governments, we're going to have to recognize that when we step into them, they are broken and weak compared to that stone. Before we get into what it looks like to step into them, we cannot miss this image of how someone engaged government while serving God, the entire time recognizing that no matter how great they create a government, a system, it will never, ever be equal to the kingdom of God, nor be able to withstand the glory of the kingdom of God. So, how do you seek out the best possible version of that? If you look at Daniel's version, which says he served in a kingdom that was a system in which he had no power to engage the national authority, but he had some power to engage the local. Like, he couldn't force the king to do anything. It was still a king. He couldn't vote out the king, something that we have some power to do. But he engaged with locally as much as he was allowed. In fact, he was given quite a bit to engage with. So how do we engage in this when we are creating our own way of interacting with golden governments, particularly when in Nebuchadnezzar's day, if you wanted to know what a gold government is, the government told you. If you wanted to know what the best government was, your opinion didn't matter. The king told you what the best one was. In our day, it's not just Nebuchadnezzar's who are crafting the governments. We get the opportunity to shape and form what these governments will be. We get an opportunity that Daniel never did. Daniel talked about others shaping it. We actually get to step into that mix. So how do we create the best versions of government? Well, the first thing we need to look at is to be honest that when we're seeking out the least evil government, one that creates the greatest possible good, we are still stepping into the muck. Because your preferred government, your golden government, my golden government, all of our golden governments, they're still evil. In fact, I would argue that we should never stop telling ourselves that the governments that we most believe in, the systems that we most believe in, the policies that we most believe in, we should never stop reminding ourselves that they are evil. Because the temptation is incredibly strong to believe that they are pure and good and noble. How about this picture here? So we're moving from the age of Babylon to France. This, anyone want to type in the message here who doesn't already know, what is this a picture of in the chat? Any guesses? I made sure to choose one that not everyone would notice. Well, no one's quite quick enough, so... Oh, there, Derek got it. Derek's right. He wins 15 points. Derek is in the lead, just in case all of you want to know. This is an image of the play Les Miserables. So, and in this story, we are engaged in the French Revolution. This is a musical, which all good musicals include a component, it seems, where the people rise up in some way. Now, I love this musical. I love the production that was done, that was in theaters, as well as, I mean, I've never seen it live, but I should probably get to it at some point. I love it. It's a great story. I love the book, and I love the musical, and I love these lines. Do you hear the people sing? Singing, I'm not going to sing for you right now, I promise. That's not why they put me on the webinar. Do you hear the people sing? Singing the songs of angry men. It's the music of a people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drums, there is a life about to start when tomorrow comes. Now, I promise when you hear it with the music, it sounds even better. These stories, these images are the temptation of humanity when it comes to governments. It's why governments, why we have revolutions. It's why people engage in, why they will sacrifice their lives for what's coming through governments, is because they believe so purely that there is a life about to start when tomorrow comes. When we succeed, we'll fix it. We'll set things right. We look upon the world and we say, they may have got it wrong before, but we can do it right this time. The reason why I would argue we need to continuously tell ourselves that our pure and perfect governments are evil is because this temptation is so strong. It is so powerful. And the tribalism of it, the tribalism of my people against your people, is so powerfully motivating for humans that unless we keep it in check by reminding ourselves that there is no possible way for this to be the kingdom of God, then we will forget. We will make enemies of people who should not be. We will fight battles that were never meant to be. I want you to pay attention to this next time you watch any movie. It's basically the center of any story. It seems that we don't seem to know how to get away from it. This tribalism and the power that we can fix it. I would argue that this is actually the same thing that I talked about in the first week about the temptation that Satan brings to Jesus when he says he can have everything, all the kingdoms of the world, if he just bows to Satan. You can fix it. And he was right. He could. And I believe that the reason it's listed as a temptation is because it truly was a temptation. It can be fixed right now. With all that power, I can end the suffering and the pain of the entire world. But the means of government never bring the kingdom of God. They will never equal the kingdom of God. And so the passion and devotion and conviction that we can fix it all, we need to be reminded that neither us nor the perfect governments we can create are saviors. And they never will be. See, it's possible in all governments to do some amazing, wonderful things in almost all governments, to do some amazing, wonderful things. But holding a gun against someone's head to make them do the right thing, while that may be a victory for a government, it will never be a victory for God's kingdom. This is a temptation that I would argue we are very weak at recognizing. I think we are good at this point at recognizing when when governments are acting in particularly evil ways, but we are very bad at recognizing when our preferred version of it is also evil. So I want to move on from the image of policy, because to be honest, I think that the bigger part of what we're going to be dealing with this evening is going to be around this. So before I move into possibilities though, did anyone have any questions about what we just went over that they didn't put yet in the chat? I'll give a moment for that. Great. If you do, feel free to keep typing them in. In fact, please, if anything comes to your mind, go ahead and type it whenever it comes up, and throw it out there. If you're thinking it, others are thinking it. So let's talk about possibilities. If we're going to set policies, essentially set governments that we think are the right government, the most important thing is recognizing all the things we just went over of what a government can be and what it can't be. Now, obviously, you've noticed that I didn't get into any specifics about what policies are the right policies, because I think that that's so open to debate and so open to our worldviews that go way beyond the immediate reality of what's, or the immediate piece that we're talking about right now. They move deeper and deeper into the realm of which level on the evil continuum, and more onto what are your theories of human nature that go beyond, or socioeconomically. So I'm not going to talk about the specific policies, though that may come up, some of it may come up in the questions by the end. So I see the question from Trinity. These are great questions. And if I haven't answered them in this second part, I will come back to them. Because the first thing is around that idea. So, how do we engage politics together? What are the possibilities for us as followers of Jesus as we engage politics together? Because engaging them individually, of course, is one option, but we're also doing this with other people, not just in unison, but there really wouldn't be a political issue at all if it was just you and just your, right? When you sit quietly alone in your car, or loudly, maybe listening to talk radio or NPR, or maybe you like to listen to classic rock like I do. Whatever the case is, in that moment, your government within the room of the car is fairly pure because it's just you. But every other interaction with government includes other people. So, a couple of things. What are the possibilities? First, I want to throw a little caution on this. Okay. First things first. Caution. When it comes to how we engage politics, our first response should be caution, not passion. I am completely convinced, and you'll see later on in this conversation, that passion matters in political conversations and in the future of politics, not just in the US, but in the world. But I believe first and foremost, when it comes to how we engage any political conversation, any idea around government, any idea around even economics, or anything that's related to systems which are controlled by government powers, We need to be cautious. Start with caution. Because first, as groups, when we make declarations as groups, like as churches, when churches make statements, or even our like denominational statements, or communities, anyone who is trying to say, this is a statement from a church, from a group of Christians, it looks an awful lot like saying, like declaring, this is our perspective on God's preferred violent action. Let me say that again. Our statements, if we're not careful, can, and not just statements, but any communications from groups of Christians that make declarations on anything related to government, can look an awful lot like we are declaring God's preferred violence. Recognizing that if we are declaring that the government take any kind of action, we are declaring that, and that this is the action God wants, then we are declaring God wants violent action. Now, even when we are right, this is really important, because I'm guessing some of you are already a little antsy with what I just said. Even if we're right about the idea, we need to use caution. Even if we're right about what government, the actions the government should take, even if it's totally true that this is the best course of action that the government takes, even if that part we're right, the government should, because there's times where we will be right, where a church should make declarations when something is so purely evil that we can't stand against it. And this came up in a couple of conversations I had over the last few weeks after the last webinar, harkening back to like Nazi Germany and the church staying silent with the treatment of people in that time. And there are statements that would need to be made. But even when we do so, those statements we need to remember in any kind of statement or public declaration of what God wants, we need to be cautious around it, because there is no government action that is a reflection of God's kingdom. No matter how much better it would be than the current one, the next one will still not reflect God's kingdom. So let me explain what I mean here. Caring for developmentally disabled people reflects God's kingdom. Caring for developmentally disabled people reflects God's kingdom. Government forcing people to care for developmentally disabled people does not reflect God's kingdom. Now, before I get people concerned about those statements even, let's remember what I'm saying in the difference here. For one, the caring for these people truly is something that I believe reflects the kingdom of God. But forcing someone to do anything does not reflect the kingdom of God, not because the care is wrong, but because God invites us, does not coerce us. Again, forcing someone to do the right thing through coercion, it may be a victory for government, but it can't be and never will be a victory for God's kingdom. So if we make those declarations, we need to be incredibly cautious about how we do so. I would say that any kind of statement in that sort of thing, any kind of work that's being done around that, needs to constantly go back to the idea of the government should do this because the actions are evil and the government has a task to reduce evil, but should never be coupled with the idea of the government should do this because this is what Christ would do. Our governments never do what Christ would do. Our governments can't do what Christ would do. Our governments will never love their enemies. Our governments will never invite. They will always coerce. So we should be way more cautious and make all of those sort of imagery reflect the idea that governments don't reflect the kingdom of God. Even if they change their actions, they won't reflect the kingdom of God, but they do need to change their actions. And the reason is that when we respond to them, we will be declaring, and it might be done communally, individually or communally, we will be saying to them, you are not fulfilling your role as the government, which is to reduce evil. Not ever anything that says you are not following Christ's way, or any statement that says this is what Christ wants us to do and you're not doing it. Of course they're not doing it. They can't do it. They are a fallen power that will never be able to follow Christ. So of course they're not. And we're so, I mean, when it comes down to it, and this is going to come up later, so I should probably not harp on it too much, but we're so inconsistent with that anyway, when we bring up you're not following what Christ would do in speaking to governments. And I mean this individually and as groups, as churches, as denominations, as other things. We're so inconsistent that if we try and apply Christ's teaching, we don't do so in any way, that would mean, that would be that kind of consistent pattern that shows we're actually trying to get them to do so. It actually really diminishes the role of what the kingdom of God is in that. So there is because this came up right here, I'm going to answer this one directly. Can't a denomination make a statement on politics that doesn't recommend a specific policy? For example, if the Mennonite church said that we believe that immigrants have dignity and that our treatment of them at the border is unacceptable, couldn't this be a statement from God that doesn't endorse violence? I'd be cautious about the from God. I'm always scared about that, but I do recognize that any declaration that we make as a church is basically a version of that, because we are saying we've gone through our process of discernment, which is different in the Mennonite church than it is in the Methodist church, or of course the Catholic church. Those statements are a lot easier because there's just a guy who decides it, right? If you happen to be a pope. And as Glenn Guyton likes to let us know, he is not the Mennonite pope. So can we make these statements? Yes, depending on what they are, I think we can. Whether or not they're the usefulness of them is a whole nother question, which is not really important to this. So we can. What we should be cautious on whenever we do something like that is knowing what we said here, which is certain treatment is unacceptable. Like we would say, like that God loves immigrants in the same way that God loves anyone around the world, right? Like any statement that we make can be a true statement about what God loves, but governments will always act violently toward people in some way. So we just need to be cautious about making some sort of statement that is too specific on that. Not just specific on what actions, but how far those actions should or shouldn't go when we go into specific policy areas. So yes, I think it is perfectly fine to say, as long as we're clear on what actions we believe are unacceptable, I think that is fine to say. I think I'm always cautious more on the idea that we don't have any kind of way of getting unanimity around these things. We have, so that makes me nervous, but that's a personal issue, not related to this, I guess. Yeah, I don't think there's a problem with making statements in that way. I don't recall the details of I was at convention, and this last convention we did pass a statement like this, but I don't remember the details on it. I intentionally didn't look it up because I didn't want this to look like I was relitigating the conversation of what we did at convention around this. This has nothing, I promise you, none of what I just said has anything to do with what the Mennonite Church has or hasn't done in making these statements. I read the way that churches well beyond our tradition engage in government, and I am reminding us that as Anabaptists, we have a particular form for it. It is entirely possible that the statement that is being referred to in this question is completely reasonable and in line with this. So long as we cautiously remember that we could be wrong about certain things, especially when it comes to what should be done, that matters a lot. I think what should be done is the biggest red flag. Like it should make us slow down to a near stall before we go forward with it. But definitely on the what shouldn't be done, I think we have a lot more leeway because we know that governments should be reducing evil, and it is much easier to recognize where they are producing evil in their actions than it is to decide together what the next action of evil is going to be that will reduce that. So that makes it a lot more complicated. But again, the reason why I didn't go into some of these things is because that's the complicated nature of this. Which leads back to my caution word. Just go slow with these things. Because our responses, well, I'm going to get into that in a minute, so I'm not going to go any further with it. But hopefully that gives enough of an answer to that. So that's more of kind of as a group, but I would also say we should be cautious really as individuals. In fact, man, I think everyone I've ever talked to in depth about government needs to be at least 1,000 times more cautious about their views. Here's the idea. This is when I wish I was live in front of all of you, because this would be more fun this way. When it comes down to it, as individuals, our views of government our views of how government should work, which government processes we think are best, which government processes are somehow objectively better than others, like the whole government systems. When it comes to the whole scope of time, those views are incredibly fickle. Well, let me ask you, how many of you are big fans of the economic system of mercantilism? Some of you probably are looking around wondering what mercantilism is. Maybe you're already Googling it. Mercantilism is the economic theory that trade arrangements generate wealth, and they are stimulated by the accumulation of profitable balances, which a government should encourage by means of protectionism. This is how the US colonies worked with Britain. This is how many colonies worked. It's an economic theory called mercantilism. And if you lived in that time and you were someone who was operating with how does a government be the best version of itself, you likely believed in mercantilism. Not everyone, of course, but there was a solid segment that did. Today, as far as I can tell in my brief research on this topic, no one believes in mercantilism. So a couple hundred years go by, and this economic system is out. When it comes to the scope of time, why are we so confident that the economic theories we hold today are perfect? They're the best. Okay, maybe not perfect, but they're the best. And we're going to fight for it because it's the best way forward. Now, this is the caution state to merely say, you don't live that long. Your views, your experience is limited. It's as is mine. Let me ask you, how many of you are monarchists? Meaning you wish that our government system right now was a monarchy. However, the details of how the monarch would be chosen, how many of you believe that we should have a monarchy where nearly unlimited authority and a single ruler is granted with some sort of self-determined succession or something like that? At least nearly unlimited authority granted to a single ruler at a national level. So yeah, how many of us would be monarchists? I'm guessing 0. Maybe there's one of you in the groups who are like, I don't know, it might be better than what some of the governments we've seen happen. Maybe. I did learn in reviewing for this webinar that there are monarchists today, and they are serious monarchists here in the US who want to engage that. Not that it matters that much. But my point is that less than 200 years ago, quite a few people in the US were monarchists, way more than now. And monarchist views still reign in many parts of the world. I'm guessing most of you think that should change, that you think democracy, or at least republicanism, not to be confused with Republican Party, just republicanism, is a better form of government. But we're fickle. It would be a mistake to not recognize that in 500 years, most likely our economic systems and our political systems will be completely different than what we see now, and none of the systems we create will look anything like them. And the reason why I have that as a statement that I would back it up is the history itself tells us that's the case. You wait 500 years and this is all going to be far different than it is now. Again, this is mostly a matter of being cautious, not a matter of that, of course, as you've heard all the rest of my stuff, this does not mean we stop. This doesn't mean we don't engage. This doesn't mean we don't have opinions. It's just why we're cautious. But and the last piece I'd say, so there are 3 things under caution. Be careful about our declarations because we're speaking for God. Be careful about our views, our individual views on politics as if they are pure and the best, because we are highly limited in our ability to know what is best. The third one is be cautious around our use of scripture because we need to use it with integrity. When the gospels and the stories of what Christ has called his people to, that's what I mentioned earlier, what Christ has called his people to, and those are used as images of what government should do. And we are proof texting scripture for the sake of our political ideas, because it's incredibly easy. Every single time I've seen images that say, here's what government should do because Jesus says, I can see that the very next, I could probably find a line right next to it where Jesus says something else that no one would apply to government, even though Jesus was teaching both of them to the same individuals at the same time in the same context. So we need to, I mean, that just needs to be, if you've done this in the way you view politics, when you talk about it and think about it, if you say that doesn't look like Jesus, you're probably, well, no, you're 100% right. It's just that's a lot easier to see in the people we disagree with politically than it is to see in our own politics. But none of our political opinions can align with Christ. Politics, or because our political systems are not the kingdom of God and never can be. So those are the 3 cautions. Let's move on from the cautions. I'm going to come back to these statements. I'm excited about what's coming up here, but I'm going to come back to these statements. But first I want to give us four commitments. These 4 commitments, I believe, will help us move forward in the conversations of everything political, whether it's how we engage in governments when we are voting, to how we are engaging each other when we disagree. Because when it comes down to it, this is the nitty-gritty of it. Our churches, and this is part of why this came up as a webinar, is that our churches are divided politically. We reflect the political dilemmas of our day. And so our churches are divided politically, and you've probably seen it. The conversations are really, really, really hard right now. Like, they're easy when people agree with us politically because we can just sit around and talk about all the stupidness of the other side. We're really good at caricaturing in those scenarios. So let's look at these 4 commitments first. Commit ourselves to finding our truest identity in Christ alone. We need to live our political lives in ways that don't mirror the package idea. What I mean is hopefully you were here for the first webinar. I just realized I should have put a slide up for it. That our politics can come oriented around packages. You have one political view and then you have another political view, and it turns out there's a group of people who agree with you, and they wrap all that into full political packages, which say you're now a Democrat, you're now a Republican, you're a liberal, a conservative, however you want to orient it. You're one of these and one of these. We need to live our political lives outside of those packages. We need to be able to speak to ideas that the political parties we are most aligned with would disagree with, if we believe that it truly would bring about less evil government. And we should be wholly committed to recognizing that there is no political party that has all of the answers from a Christian view of what a government should be. And if we are fully devoted, so devoted to a political party in that way, that we're going to proceed with everything that comes out of them, we need to deeply reflect on whether or not our truest identity is in Christ. Tribalism is powerful. It is a powerful temptation. Condemning political opponents and defending your own party, regardless of what happens, is evidence of that kind of tribalism. And none of what we're talking about here, none of these commitments, none of this view on how to engage government as an Anabaptist, none of this will work. None of it will work if we find ourselves most identified with one of those tribes as opposed to in Christ. So I would say that's something we need to pay attention to. I'm going to get specific here for a moment, and hopefully I don't burn this whole webinar down, because this came up in a sermon I gave on this topic. If you were opposed to Bush using drone warfare and the devastation it caused during the Iraq War, but didn't speak out when Obama continued that sort of work in the Middle East, that's a problem. It's a problem because it shows the kind of tribalism that is so devastating for Christians. If we believed it was wrong for government to take that action, then it should be wrong the very next year, just because if you're a Democrat, your guy was in the White House. That should not matter for whether or not it's wrong. And it shouldn't matter for whether or not we're taking action if you believe it to be the wrong thing for the government to be doing. If today, I will say I recognize this clearly in a whole lot of the way that politicians speak. You should know this absolutely by now, that almost every scenario in which a politician is frustrated or angry at another politician, they would not respond the exact same way if it was someone in their own party. And you, me, we need to be convicted not to do the same. Right now, there's an impeachment process in play, and neither side is acting the way they would if it was the exact same scenario, but with different people. If the political parties were flipped, but the exact same scenario, each party is acting differently than they would. Now, I don't expect them not to. I don't expect them not to. This is how our government is structured into political parties, and we have a powerful two-party system that is not likely to come down anytime soon. And so I don't expect them to act any other way. But Christians who are focused on an Anabaptist commitment should find our identity in Christ alone, so much so that our critical view of government should be universally applied and not tempered by the party which is in power. It should not be held back because that's one of ours. Yeah, all right. So I said that. Let's move on to the next piece. If we are going to do this, we're going to do this. And we are going to have to learn to ignore the talking heads. We're going to have to ignore the people out there whose primary place, let me put it this way. You need to be deeply distrustful. If this is your identity, you, me, all of us, we need to be deeply distrustful of those who make the most money when we are the most angry politically. We need to be deeply distrustful and ignore the talking heads who tell us about how terrible the other side is. And it's possible they're right, but we need to be looking for people who aren't spending all of their time primarily trying to get us angry at other people. I'm not going to name names because you've got your own. Now, pay attention for a second. If right now you're thinking, yeah, that's right, no one should be listening to this person anymore, just make sure you're not doing the opposite on your side of the aisle. If the people we spend time listening to around politics cause us to find heavy identity in partisanship, to not love our enemies, but to hate our enemies, to not love more, if we come out of those conversations and that information with not loving people more, but instead actually moving toward hating them, then we've got a real problem with this commitment. It's interesting because I've been in different communities at different times. Like I've been around groups of people who are far more conservative and people who are far more liberal on issues in our society. And it's a weird step to try and keep up with how this works, but neither side in those two conversations wanted to give this up. This was the hardest part, was to have them give up listening to people who are just spending their time making you angry at others. Now, I'm going to explain a little further on this because this is one that mattered a lot to me in figuring out how to respond as an Anabaptist Christian to our politics. Secondly, so this is the first commitment. The second commitment then is to commit to tearing down political dividing walls. Political parties are mythical beasts, and we should slay them. You like that? That's the most violent metaphor I'm going to go with today, being good Mennonites. Political parties are mythical beasts. If it were up to me, it'd be the end of the donkey and the elephant forever. In order to tear down political dividing walls, we have to commit to other people, because they will not do that with us. Meaning, if someone is highly engaged in a political ideology, I don't care which one it is, then their primary way and perspective on looking at other people who disagree with them is not first and foremost as people loved by God, who Christ is willing to die for. Their first and foremost way of looking at other people who disagree with them will be as that political party, that group, that problem. People often respond to political disagreement out of the most difficult base emotional states. We have several base emotional states out of where most of our emotions come, or all of our emotions, based on at least contemporary psychological theories around this. And it seems that most of our political responses, when someone is in that group, that other camp, they spur in us in this disagreement anger, disgust, or contempt, and fear. Now, I'm not saying that's you. Maybe you are someone who is able to go beyond that. And when you run into someone who is of a different political view, a strongly different political view, maybe you don't have issues with anger, disgust, contempt, or fear. But you should assume they do. For the sake of doing this well, of tearing down political dividing walls, you should assume that they do have those views and those responses to you. I could show you video after video. I was considering doing it here, but these videos can get really difficult because of the way people respond, of people of different political views interacting with one another. The last one I was going to show you is people in a church doing it. And people switch into a different mode when those conversations happen. They move, and it is hard, even if you have the best of intentions, to keep yourself out of it, and it's even harder to engage someone when they're in it. So assume noble intent. You might be wrong. In fact, I would argue that in most political conversations, assuming noble intent of the other person, you will be wrong, because their intent is not going to be noble. But I would assume noble intent in the conversation in order to tear down dividing walls. If you start in those conversations by stopping yourself from any feelings of anger, disgust, contempt, or fear you have, and assume noble intent on their part, your engagement with them will change. Your conversations will change. Because conversations in those emotional states, those states of anger and contempt and disgust and fear, these conversations are already stalled from the get-go. If you assume noble intent, it brings you back into being a non-anxious presence in a conversation. It lowers defense mechanisms, and it allows you to have a real conversation. Now, this is only the first part, because if you use this as a weapon, you're going to be in trouble. This will backfire. The first part, of course, is this assuming noble intent and being this then non-anxious presence in the conversation. The second one is listening sincerely. And I mean that. If we are going to tear down any political dividing walls, then we need to listen sincerely. Sincerely, not with judgment, at the deepest level of listening. Right now, distrust between political parties is at an all-time high. We need to listen to each other without the goal of persuasion. Now listen, in a situation where you feel confident this person is wrong about something, and you feel confident that they're wrong because they're committed to their political party above everything else, and you feel confident that they are having problems with committing themselves to the identity in Christ alone, that they are not willing to tear down political dividing walls. In those situations, which if you're committed to finding an Anabaptist way forward, you will run into a lot, because it means you're willing to engage in the political conversations of the day. In those situations, if you go in with those ideas on the front, you will look just like everyone else. You will look at them and they will see you as someone who thinks they're stupid, as someone who thinks that's the number one thing. When I listen to conversations around this, people just think that anyone who disagrees with them politically is stupid. So they will think you think they're stupid, which will bring up all their anger, their disgust, their contempt, their fear. If you go in and say internally, I am going to listen. This is a person, a real human in here. This is not a political party or even an ideology, but a real person. You can hopefully find what is truly the true passion that might be underneath that, but you'll at least start to find what the fears are. We all have them when it comes to politics. You'll find what the fears are. You'll find what they're willing to give up, what they're willing to allow the government to do for the sake of these views, of these fears or hopes. But you can only do it if you truly want, if you'll truly listen. You cannot expect to be heard at the same time. All right. Number 3 of the 4 commitments. Commit to political responses that come from introspection, faithfulness, and conviction. Introspection, faithfulness, and conviction. First, introspection. You're going to have a careful evaluation of the problems and the solutions, including sincerely engaging with the opposite viewpoints, even if you don't agree. If you want to go forward in a way that reflects the recognition that all governments are evil, remember that idea, then you are choosing the least evil, and in doing so, that better bring some sober introspection. How much are you moving forward because you think it is not evil, but good? How much are you moving forward with this because you think those people are evil, but my people are not? Whoever the people are in political systems, because that's not the case. Not because the other ones aren't evil, but because all of yours are too. This is the system of government that exists in the world. If you don't have that kind of introspection, then you're going to have the kind of fighting that we have of we're going to have the image of that we have some sort of sanctimonious response to the world around us, that the government systems that we believe in become holy and all others become tragic mistakes. Now, some really are. I would never argue that. Some really, really are. But as long as you have some really are tragic mistakes, not the holy part. As long as you have the perspective that yours is the right and holy place instead of mine is bad too. Mine is bad too. What I want will cause evil to exist, and I will say yes to some kind of evil. As long as you aren't in that boat, when you're outside of that, you will continue to join the fighting. We've all done it. I'll still argue forever that this is the temptation. Like, it's so quick, it's so fast. If you're not being introspective about this, it is so fast to go back to the belief that we're right, that we've got all the answers when it comes to our political views. So first is introspection. Secondly is faithfulness. Carefully consider the evil continuums. How evil is the current situation? How evil is the solution? I gave a story, I believe, in my last webinar. If not, I can't recall at the moment. If not, I gave it during other talks on this, about a government intervention program in the inner city of, I believe it was in California. Unfortunately, I'm pulling this out of my head right now because I'm adding it in at the last minute. But this intervention was intended to help youth who were involved in small crimes to get kind of rehabilitated communally, so that they will not, over time, act criminally. So they created a mentor group and occasionally got the kids together and spent time together, and the mentors worked with them, and they tracked the data on this. And it turns out kids who went through the program were more likely to create or to be involved in crime later on than kids who weren't. Now, as far as they can tell in the assessment, the only reason this was the case, or well, actually they have no idea, but at least one of the theories is that the reason this would be is perhaps the youth who were involved in that sort of activity, in this kind of antisocial activity, being around each other, specifically with other kids who were specifically involved in that, meant that certain interactions were happening that caused something. They don't know. They shut the program down. Now, here's the thing. when it comes to faithfulness and considering the evil continuums, you've got two options. You got one that says, we believe in this, we'll keep doing it even though it's not working. Or do we as people of Christ say in a government program, that is harming more than it's helping? That's now part of a worse evil in this situation, because government is involved, is doing something in that regard. And so that means evil is being added, and they're not reducing, in fact, they're increasing it. You got multiple options, but in that faithfulness scenario of looking at the evil continuum, you can't just stick with the status quo. You can't just say, yes, it must continue. Now, you could say, shut it down. It's not good. Let's try something else. You could say, let's try a different type of this intervention. It doesn't mean to not intervene necessarily, but it does mean that if you've got a faithfulness to Christ and this idea that government has a role to reduce evil, we cannot continue with patterns that are not working. And so that's the faithfulness that I think we all need to agree to, even if we disagree on what those patterns are. We need to commit ourselves to it. All right, so faithfulness is that one. The next one is conviction. Now, this is what I said I was going to get to eventually. Conviction. We need to follow through. We need to follow through. We need to commit to follow through, engaging the governments of our world with the conviction that reflects the sober consideration that you've given to your political ideas. Our neighbors, they truly need us as faithful followers of Christ to continually call the government back to its role of limiting evil and not adding to it. We need to actually be involved. Even when I put caution out there, even when I say we need to go through this introspection and check our faithfulness, the end result will be conviction. We need to take action on these things when we look at our world, because we are invited to in the system we have currently. For one, we need to actually do something about it. Our neighbors, because the power of government is so strong, they are directly impacted by it. And if we are followers of Christ and love our neighbors, then we need to be engaging that, which is directly tied to the last one. Commit to a posture of repentance and humility. All choices will include participating in either violence or threat of violence. So aim for the least violence and recognize that we will often miss the mark. Our neighbors need us as faithful followers of Christ to be a living alternative to partisan posturing and the seduction of political certainty. We need to be the people who commit to a posture of repentance and humility when it comes to government, saying, look, especially during presidential elections, you will hear political certainty at the highest level. I mean, people who are running for president, more than anyone I've ever seen, have all sorts of ideas that they think are the solution to something. We should neither be seduced into thinking that there is the ultimate good, best, perfect solution out there. We need to recognize that what we're looking for is the least evil solution. Not the most effective necessarily. The most effective might be truly evil, but the least evil solution possible. Commit to a posture of repentance and humility. I have a sticker in my car. If you got in my car, you'd see an I voted sticker. And when people look at that, they assume that like I'm either like proud that I voted and my guy got in, or I'm proud that I voted. I'm with the resistance, right? My girl didn't get in. That's the situation. The guy got in or the girl didn't. And that's what they tend to assume. It's got to be one or the other, right? And neither one is actually true. That sticker's in my car to remind me that I participated. The result of this, of what's happening, I participated in a national election for a president, and the results of it are on me as much as anyone else, because I participated, regardless of what I voted. I jumped into the group of people who said, we're going to decide, and I was one of them. And the results are just as much on me as anyone else then. No matter what the outcome is, everything this president does, if I participated, everything includes me, because I said yes to the system. I will join, I will participate, I will affirm a certain process. And that's true for everyone else, in my opinion. As a Christian, in this Anabaptist tradition, when we participate, we become part of the people who need to keep repentance and humility as we go forward. I do want to ask, as we move to the end here, and I hopefully can answer these last questions. Sorry, I wanted to leave more time, but I rambled a bit. I want to ask you, though, what it would look like just to consider before you, by the end of this night, before you forget all about the conversations we've had over these several weeks, to consider what your church would look like if this is a posture you took. This one in particular, but any of these 4 commitments. What would it look like if that was what your community took, a posture they took on politics? What if when people came to you with political conversations, they trusted that you were going to help offer sober advice as an Anabaptist on what you thought was the most evil or least evil, as that be what you're seeking? And why it is that people don't do that. Why they don't come to us in that way, why our community doesn't come to us as I don't want to call us neutral observers, but doesn't come to us as people who are most interested in the government creating the least evil. Instead, we are courted by political parties. Why? What would it look like if we weren't? What would our community look like? What would our nation look like if we weren't? All right, I'm going to try and answer a couple of these questions. I think I answered part of the leader one, but I'm going to go back to that first and then get on to Brian's question or comments on this. I already hit that one on the denomination one. Is it bad? This goes back to a question from Trinity. Is it bad or improper for a pastor, church leader, to share his or her personal political convictions and positions with the congregation? Does a pastor abdicate their responsibility to provide leadership or be prophetic if he or she refuses to engage in what might be considered political issues or actions? So let's start there. First, is it bad or improper for a pastor or church leader to share their personal political convictions or positions? That depends on how they would weight them in the community. I would really be cautious to make any declaration of whether they should or shouldn't. If you have 5 people in a church and it's a really tight-knit community and is able to have the kind of conversations that are like we described here, then I can't see any reason why it would be problematic. I can see in certain situations why it would be, in terms of like from behind the pulpit, because in that scenario you are as you present at least I would hope most pastors, when they are presenting a sermon, they're trying to speak from beyond themselves and speak to the mind of Christ for the community. And speaking on the mind of Christ on specific political views, it seems very or positions, I would say, because this is specifically about the political convictions or positions, could be quite troubling to me. I have heard some that do sound incredibly troubling. I would say that we see this in churches. I think his name is Jeffords, his last name. I can't remember his first right now, but he's a reverend in a Baptist church that's been highly involved in politics for a long time. He seems to be a stalwart Republican, part of that party. I find the way that he presents his views on politics to be tied to Christianity in such a way that I think is abhorrent as an Anabaptist Christian. I think it just does not meet the criteria here. And that is regardless of what his political views are. It's the fact that he ties them in that way. You could assume because of the way he does it, I would disagree. Like on the particular political views, I think anytime a Christian finds himself wholly in one political camp, in that one pocket, in that one grouping, right? Outside of that, in that one package, you're going to find out that I disagree with something they believe because they've put themselves in a camp, in a package. So it's not that specifically, it's just to say that, yeah, using the levers of religious communication as such to tie political opinions to Christ-mindedness from a pulpit, that is not a good plan. But no, as a general rule, I think it's entirely reasonable for people to share their political views with anyone. I don't see why a pastor couldn't or shouldn't, unless the engagement with the community is such that they believe that by sharing those political views, they are somehow defining the mind of Christ on these political views. That's where I'd caution it. This might be coming from the fact that people at Trinity, thank you for putting in there, Robert Jeffries. Yeah, that's the game. Anyway, question might be coming from the fact that people at Trinity, if they think long and hard about maybe my political views, they likely could not pinpoint them. They probably, it might be, I'm just guessing, that part of that could come from the fact that I don't put my political views out nearly anywhere, and that most people couldn't tell you what those are in the church setting, because I'm concerned that it could be viewed as the holiest version of those views, and I don't want that. I'm just too cautious about that, but I don't think that should necessarily be true for everyone. Do they abdicate their responsibility to provide leadership or be prophetic if they refuse to engage what might be considered political issues or actions? That depends on their view of how the church should be engaging those political views or actions. Since I believe firmly that individuals will disagree wildly on these things, particularly in the contemporary political climate we're in. That's why I'm even more so cautious about how pastors engage. I don't believe that the image of the pastor as primarily political coordinator is a proper Anabaptist Christian image, other than political coordinator for the kingdom of God. I think that we are primarily, and the actual, when it says like abdicate their leadership, the primary leadership of a pastor is to reflect the kingdom of God. We are to help the congregation form in such a way that it is an alternative to the world around us, that it is a living alternative to what the world is like. That when people look at the Christian church, they say, that is a beautiful thing. And I think the idea that the pastor should necessarily be a political coordinator outside of the kingdom of God as a defining trait is problematic, mostly because I think it's easy then to get your eyes on the golden statue and away from the stone, right? So that's not to say that there aren't times when they should, but I don't think I'd put that as very high on the list of what pastors should be doing. For one, pastors are already asked to do more things than they're really properly trained for in most churches. Like anyone who's been a pastor can tell you, seminary trains you for some things, but it doesn't tell you how to operate the lights. And seriously, sanctuary lights can be tricky. It doesn't tell you when you should or shouldn't call the exterminator. Anyway, what I'm saying is that, you know what you'll find out in almost every seminary is they don't have a single class on political theory. They don't have a single class on which government systems are best. So I would say that even the idea that we should expect our pastors to be proficient and capable of being the most cogent political leaders is way too much to ask of them. All right, how should a pastor determine whether a particular issue or call to action is too political for a congregation to engage in? Well, this is a question that changes the format a little. I wouldn't ever say that any action is too political for a congregation to be involved in. That's not it at all. That's never should be the equation. The equation should be whether or not the community can speak with consensus on a level of evil involved in that political action. So it's far more about whether or not they can speak with consensus and that it doesn't distract from the work that needs to be done in the community. There are a lot of churches who really, I don't think that means that the people in the church shouldn't be involved in the local community and the politics of the local community, but a whole lot of churches really need to make sure that they aren't fighting among themselves on political ideas or becoming one political party. I've met churches which are basically all just, like if you ask them their political views, they are all the same. And that means they're oriented around something other than the cross. If everyone in your church has the same political views, or nearly the same political views, then what's at the center? what is actually at the center of what's coordinating the church. And so the caution on what they should engage in that has more to do with, in my opinion, on what are we centering? What are we putting in the middle? And as a believer in an Anabaptist faith, which is cruciform, which is centrally cruciform, I think that we need to recognize that if anything else goes in there other than the cross of Christ and the willingness to sacrifice ourselves for those people who might hate us, I mean, all of that, if that's not central, then I think we need to stop being so convicted about doing those other things. Okay, this last bit here from Brian says, one of the unspoken rules that emerges frequently when churches engage in politics is that we are allowed to make comments about values and ideas, but not about specific people or political parties. However, it seems to me that your caution against specifically, which is wise, cuts a different direction. The danger is of the church if the church ends up endorsing a specific form of violence, not naming a specific evil. This seems open up the possibility of taking side in politics if one side is, for example, acting in a way that is egregious. For example, it would give us the space to condemn the Nazi Party in Germany, or Hitler specifically, or theoretically someone in the US if the situation were bad enough. Yes, Brian, 100%. I do not believe that the church abdicates either its responsibility, and I mean this both individual, I don't want to call that individual because the church is never individual. I mean that both as non-defined nonprofit institutions, so communities of faith, which means pockets of Christians, however many they may be, and as full institutions recognized by government authorities. I don't think anything abdicates our responsibility to call evil, evil. And so I think that, yes, depending on what we consider that severity to get to at some point, at some level, we absolutely can and should and must, I would say, point out that evil. We just have to, the caution is always, it's never around the idea that we shouldn't point that out. It's always that we should be cautious about whether or not we're doing so from a posture that says our political view is the right one. There's a big difference from saying our political view is the right one and that's why this is wrong, and saying instead, what you're doing goes too far. It's entirely reasonable for us to look at people who disagree and political groups that disagree, political parties that disagree, and say theories that they have in their political party are totally reasonable for Christians, even though I don't want those political ideas to come true. And then there's also a way to look at those things and say, you're now engaging in activities, whether it's a party or a person, you're now engaging in activities that are not reasonable. They're no longer reasonable for a political view. They go beyond that, and they are too evil. And so we should engage. Yes, the Nazi one is an extreme one, but yes, I would argue that this view would mean that we, as Mennonites, should have a history. Our history should be, in Nazi Germany, that we stood in front of violent actions by the government that were so evil that we, even if we couldn't get them to stop, that we put our bodies in the way to stop them because of our conviction to Jesus Christ. So yes, it does mean that we engage politics. It definitely means that, well, if you've been to any of these, or now that you've been through all these webinars, that we engage them differently. I think that's it. Shannon, unless we want to allow more time for questions, it looks like our time is coming to an end.
Yes, thank you so very much, Scott. This has been just very rich. You've given us so much to think about. I really appreciate it. And I know that you've been getting lots of emails and that you are willing to continue to answer emails. So we'll leave it at that for those who might have more questions.